All right, let's take a trip back to a moment that really changed the game for Microsoft's data platform. We're talking about SQL Server 2014. And look, this wasn't just some minor update. This release tackled two gigantic challenges head-on: the desperate need for more speed and the fact that the cloud was becoming, well, everything.
I want you to think back to the early 2010s for a second. Your CPUs? They were getting ridiculously fast. But your data was still trapped on these spinning metal platters. I mean, that physical speed limit of a hard drive had become the biggest bottleneck in tech. If you were running, say, an e-commerce site, every single millisecond of that delay was costing you money. Something big had to change.
And then, bam, April 2014, the revolution arrived. Microsoft launched SQL Server 2014, and it was a massive statement. It was a completely new way of thinking about that performance problem, totally changing the conversation about where our data should live and just how fast it could really move.
And these weren't just fluffy marketing terms. They were the real design principles behind every major new feature. So let's peel back that first layer and really look at the feature that was designed to just absolutely crush those bottlenecks we were just talking about. Okay, let's get into this. Because this right here was the main event: in-memory OLTP. The idea is actually pretty simple, but the impact? Whoa, huge. Forget reading from a slow disk. You can now take your busiest tables, things like shopping carts or user session data, and just tell the database, hey, keep these in RAM all the time. All of a sudden, your transactions weren't limited by disk speed anymore. They were limited by the speed of electricity. It was a complete game changer.
So, how did they pull this off? Well, that's what's so cool. Under the codename Hackathon, the team built this engine from scratch. It used lock-free data structures, which means you didn't have different processes just waiting in line to read data, a huge win for concurrency. And then you got natively compiled stored procedures, which basically took your database code and turned it directly into machine code. I mean, as close to the metal as you can possibly get for raw speed. Of course, not everyone could afford to just load up a server with terabytes of RAM, right? Microsoft got that, so they added this really smart, practical feature called the buffer pool extension. The whole idea was to use a fast SSD as a sort of overflow area for your RAM, like a giant L2 cache for your database. It gave you this incredible performance boost for way less money than buying more RAM. It was the perfect solution for anyone with huge data sets, but, not so huge budgets.
And that's the key takeaway here, this relentless, obsessive focus on performance at every single level. Take delay durability. This feature let you bend the rules of transaction safety just a little bit. So instead of waiting for every transaction to be physically written to disk, you could let it commit in memory first, and then write it to disk in the background. Yeah, it's a trade-off, a tiny bit of risk for a huge gain in speed. But for a lot of systems, that was an easy choice to make.
But you know what? Insane speed was only half the story. While everyone was trying to squeeze every last drop of performance out of their on-premise servers, Microsoft was looking up to the cloud. And this vision back then was pretty radical. See, instead of seeing the cloud as a total replacement for your data center, SQL Server 2014 was built to see it as an extension. It was designed from the ground up to seamlessly connect your on-premise world with the incredible power of Microsoft Azure. And this slide just lays out perfectly how they made that vision real and practical. Your nightly backups? Forget shipping tapes off-site. You could just send them straight to Azure storage. Way cheaper, way more reliable. Disaster recovery? You could spin up a perfect copy of your server in an Azure VM just waiting for you. The cloud went from this big, scary, abstract thing to just another useful tool in your toolbox.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit, because all this power is amazing, but what about the poor person who actually has to manage it all? Well, SQL Server 2014 had them covered too.
Oh man, this was a revelation. If you have ever stared at a static query plan, just guessing where it was getting stuck, you know the pain. For the very first time, you could watch it execute live. You could actually see the rows flowing from one step to the next and see exactly where the bottleneck was. It was like going from a paper map to a live GPS. All the guesswork, just gone.
And really, the whole toolkit got a major upgrade. The cardinality estimator, which is like the brain of the query optimizer, was completely rewritten, leading to much smarter plans right out of the box. And we finally got a proper user interface for extended events, which made deep dive diagnostics a whole lot less like a dark art.
These were real quality of life improvements that made a difference every single day.
So when you take a step back and you look at the whole package, the in-memory speed, the cloud integration, the smarter tools, what's the real legacy of SQL Server 2014? I think this quote just absolutely nails it. This release was the great connector. It wasn't just another version number. It was a pivot. It proved that you didn't have to choose between the raw horsepower of your own servers and the incredible potential of the cloud. It really did lay the foundation for the intelligent, hybrid data platforms that we pretty much take for granted today. It brought two totally different worlds together under one roof. On one side, you had the blistering speed of in-memory processing, mastering the on-premise data center, and on the other, you had this seamless, practical bridge to the future in the cloud. By connecting them, SQL Server 2014 didn't just evolve, it set a completely new direction for what a modern database could and should be.
And that foundation it built, it was rock solid. With the big problems of speed and cloud connectivity now solved, the stage was set for the next evolution, SQL Server 2016. That one would build on all this by tackling unstructured data with JSON support, adding new layers of security with always encrypted, and even letting you travel through time with temporal tables. The innovation train just kept on rolling, and we will definitely dig into that story next time.